My aim of the class today, I guess, is to make it easy for you guys, you know. I think with, like, who's seen barbecue pitmasters here? Yeah, so they kind of overcomplicate it, and especially with a lot of the stuff on the internet, it's all very competition based, so they tend to overcomplicate it, and people think it's much harder to make good barbecue than it is. So what I'm doing today is making it really easy and showing you how quick and easy it can be. If you want to do, you know, the recipes that have, 20 ingredients and making your own rubs and sauces, that's all in the recipe book. But today is about nice and quick, easy. We're using some pre-made rub and sauces that will just jazz up and mix around a bit. So that's the goal of today, to show that it's pretty easy to make good barbecue, because a lot of people think it's really hard, and it's not, We're not building spaceships, we're just cooking barbecue. It's pretty easy stuff. So these are just the pork fillets. We're gonna wrap them in bacon, because it's bacon. Why wouldn't you wrap it in bacon? I will actually go through, there is a cooking reason that we're wrapping it in bacon as well, which I'll go through later. Now with your pork fillets, you can trim them up a little bit. I'll do it with this. These aren't too bad. I'll show you a little bit with this one. Just so you got that stuff there. For home cooking, I never trim it up and I don't worry about it, but I'll just show you on one, just in case you wanna do that yourself. But again, I'm here to make it easy today, guys, so it's not really a necessary step. For a competition, I'd probably, if I was gonna hand this in a competition, which we've had to do pork fillets before over in America, I probably would trim this up. But again, is there anyone interested in doing comps here? No, not at this stage. Sweet, all good. If there is, just come, you can chat to me in the break so I can go through some stuff. But so you see how that membrane just sort of peels off there? You just guide it with your knife. You can just kind of tidy that up in the 1 or 2 sections and peel that back off if you want to get really kind of finicky about it. These are actually not too bad. You can get your butcher to do it, obviously. Some butchers will do it automatically. Sometimes you'll have to ask, but any time that you're getting your butcher to do knife work, chances are they're going to pay you for it. So most of the time, I don't worry about asking for that because you're going to get it cheaper, and the way we cook it, it's not an issue anyway. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to put a couple of different flavors on this pork. We're going to kind of layer the flavors, I guess, which is a bit of a competition style of way to do, but it's easy. It just means we put one flavor on and then another rub on after. It's easy. That's layering flavors. How easy is that? So we want, no stupid questions, mate, only stupid answers. So good question, because that's what I'm about to talk about. So what we want is, we want the rub to stick to the meat. If we were just to put the rub straight onto this, it doesn't really adhere very well. So you want to use something as a glue. So what I do, I just quickly wipe the paper towel just to get some of the juices, because it's been cryovac. You don't have to, you can leave that on, but what I like to do is just wipe that off. Then I'm using mustard as the glue for the rub to stick. You don't have to use mustard. Don't stress, it's not really going to taste like mustard. It dissolves away in the cooking. I like to use mustard just because it's kind of like, water, vinegar and sugar, and it helps form, we're wrapping this in bacon so it's not as important, but most of the other meats we do, the mustard helps form a bark with the sugar content in it, and the bark is just that kind of crunchy outer layer. You can use oil, and all the rubs are oil soluble, so that's fine to use as well. I just kind of like mustard. I mainly use it, or started using it for all the longer cooks, like brisket, pork shoulder, all that sort of stuff. But for the shorter cooks, I just use it as well. The reason I like it is because oil is clear, it's not really too much of an issue on these things, but on some other meats where you might have a little divot, sometimes it can be like a fairly big pool of oil there, and you can't really see it because it's see-through, whereas a mustard, you can see if you've got any clumps or blobs of mustard that you just need to smooth out. Because if you don't, and you've got a big clump of our glue, either oil or mustard, easier. Then when you put the rub on, you end up with a big clump of rub, and chances are that might come off, or when you're eating that, you might bite and just get like a big section of rub, which is not the nicest thing. So that's the reasoning behind using mustard. You can use whatever. You don't have to use like a fancy mustard, just regular. I've got that from Costco, but just regular mild American mustard is fine. It's more just as a glue, not really using it as a flavoring at all. The rubs is where that's where we're putting flavor into this meat. Any questions at all on that? Sweet. So, the rub that we're using on the pork fillets for the first part is the Oak Ridge Competition Beef and Pork. So what I'll do after I sprinkle it on, I'll just leave it up there and you can come have a smell of it if you want, or just put a little bit on your hand if you want to taste it. It's a pretty good all-purpose rub, this one. Obviously it's specifically designed for pork and beef. So this is just kind of going to be our base layer rub. Then we're going to wrap it in bacon after that and then put a bit of a rub on the bacon. Swap these over, do the same the other side. So the other thing I'll go through in terms of applying rub is, the good thing to remember with rubs is there's 2 times that you want to, in terms of timing, when you put the rub on and when you put it on the barbecue. It's either one or the other. So the first one is after about, and you'll see it with this one later on, it gets what I call the rub tacking up. So it just kind of sticks to the meat a little bit better. That happens at about the 10 to 15 minute mark. So that's kind of, you know, around, well, it's not going to be as much of an issue here because we're wrapping it in bacon, but normally around 5 to 10 minutes you leave it, because if you just put it straight in the smoker, it hasn't really dissolved at all yet, and sometimes it affects your bark a little bit. So you want to leave it for sort of at least 5 to 10 minutes. But what you don't want to do is leave it past 20 minutes, because what happens is any rub that has salt in it, which I'll give you the hot tips pretty much every single rub, that's one of the main ingredients in all rubs. What happens is when you put salt on meat, the salt at around about 20 minutes starts drawing the moisture out of the meat. So the worst offender I see for this is like when people are going to cook steak on the barbie. So they'll go get the steak out of the fridge, they'll put the salt and pepper on it early, then they go fire up the barbie, and then by the time they've kind of stuffed around or cleaned the barbie or whatever they're doing, they come back and there's a pool of moisture on the steak. Everyone's seen that before? So you're drying out your meat and you haven't even started cooking it yet. So that's the last thing you want to do, because that's sucking the internal moisture out of the meat and you can't put that back in. If you put that on the barbecue, that then just evaporates and you've kind of dried out your meat before you've started. So you want to avoid that kind of 20-minute to an hour mark. Or the other one that you can do is after about 8 hours, all that moisture that's come to the top, the salt dissolves. It's only the salt, none of the other spices or garlic powder, none of that dissolves in the water, but the salt does, and it becomes like a salt water type solution, and it actually goes back inside the meat. That's called dry brining. So you can, that's at about the 8 hour mark, but I just say overnight for ease of use. So if you want to prep it early, you can prep the rub the night before, leave it overnight, and then put it on the barbecue the next day, just as long as it's had that 8 hours. So either kind of around about 10 minutes or overnight is the ideal thing. You don't have to get stressed too much, like if you've forgotten about it and it's bang on 40 minutes, you haven't ruined it. Like, don't freak out and say, oh, I'm just gonna chuck it out now because it's been 40 minutes, but just know that you have dried it out a little bit. So it's obviously not ideal to do that if you can help it. So what we're gonna do here, there's a couple of different ways that you can wrap it in bacon. This is what I've found the easiest. I'm all about ease. See, this is my job, so I want to kind of make it as easy as I can for myself, but also for you guys. Now the butcher, this is streaky bacon, which just means it's just the belly part, not the actual loin of the bacon. So it's normally called streaky bacon or American bacon or something along those lines. Now, normally the one I buy is a little bit longer. This will still work, but it's probably a little bit short for my liking, but this is what the butcher gave me. So I just lay it down in a row like that, and I just fold it over like that. That's our bacon. So you can, you know, make it adhere with toothpicks, but then it's really, then you've got to put toothpicks in everywhere, and it's kind of a little bit annoying to you know, move around the smoker and that sort of stuff. So I do the fold at the top so that it kind of minimizes the chance. If you do the fold at the bottom, every time you move it, the bacon kind of falls off. So this is kind of the easiest way. We might still get one or two of the bacon things fall off, but most of the time it stays together pretty well. So you can just sort of use whatever bacon. If you are using a smoked bacon, just be careful because we're going to smoke it again here now. So sometimes it can be a little bit too strong in the smoke flavor, especially if you're using like a hickory smoked bacon, which is pretty strong smoke flavor. So I'll normally use one without a smoke flavor or a very mild one, just so we don't overpower it too much, you know what I mean? But smoke's kind of like seasoning. Some people like it more smoky than others, so you just kind of adjust it to your personal preference of taste. And what happens as well when we start cooking this is the bacon, the fat in the bacon melts and renders a bit, and it helps it stick a little bit more on the top, kind of holds itself together a little bit. So a little bit thicker, but fine. If you fancy them where it's a bit thicker, put one there. Just so there's plenty of bacon. Can't have too much bacon. That's a rule. You can, yeah. You don't even have to wrap it in bacon. You can just do the same recipe without the bacon wrap. The reason, we can go through it now. The reason that I use bacon, there's a couple of reasons. So pork fillet is from the muscle group of, I call them bludgers, so the muscles that don't really do much, which means they're naturally tender because they don't have much connective tissue. They don't have to do much work. But most of the time, the muscles that are naturally tender, they're very lean and they're not super flavorful. It's not as though it's bursting with flavor, whereas we do something like a pork shoulder that's completely chock-a-block full of connective tissue. That's got a lot of flavor in it. So I like to add the bacon because it's still pork, so we're still kind of getting that pork flavor, but it just gives it a bit of a flavor boost. I personally find just pork fillets can be a little bit bland. But the bacon matches in with the pork flavor, and you'll notice at the end it's still fairly porky, but just adds a bit better flavor in my opinion. The other reason is because it is a really lean muscle, the bacon actually just helps protect it a little bit by kind of wrapping it up in the bacon, and it stops the meat. When you cook meat, it's kind of like us, you know, if it was a hot day here, like I'd be sweating to cool down. So when meat's in the barbecue to cook, it will sweat slightly as well. This kind of stops it from sweating as much. Sort of similar idea to spritzing. Now it doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make it a little bit more likely to hold on to some of its natural juices. So you just find a little bit of a juicier product with the bacon as well. So you could do other things. If you do other things, depending on what you use, anything that you wrap it in can help with the meat sweating, so it'll help hold a little bit more natural juices. And then, yeah, depending on what it is, you'll obviously get that little bit of a flavor boost. Bacon's pretty good, yeah. So, what we're gonna do now is, again, I like to use just kind of a neutral-ish bacon flavor so I can kind of add my own flavors to it. Feel free to use flavored bacon if you want. What we're going to do now is a real tiny bit of mustard, but I'm not as concerned on this top layer. The rub won't stick quite as good, but I do find, because the bacon is so fatty, when you put it in there, oh, that's a cut. You're right. When you put it in there, as compared to other meats, that fat renders quite quickly. and the rub will stick a little bit better even though we haven't put as much mustard on. So, the rub I'm going to use here is a John Henry's sugar maple seasoning, so it's quite a sweet rub. The one that we first put on is reasonably savoury. This one's going to be quite sweet. So if you're making candied bacon, I'd use something like this to candy the bacon. So it's not, the way we're cooking it, the bacon's not going to fully candy, but it's a similar type process that we're following there. We're just adding nice sweet flavour. You might even be able to smell this in the front row. It's pretty strong in the maple, so it just goes well with pork. And because of the high sugar content in this rub, it's just going to help that bark and crust form a bit more on the edge of the bacon. So, I'm going to go put these on the smoker. So, just going to put a little bit of wood on the back here of the firebox. So these are just chunks of cherry wood. So we're going to use fruit woods, like a nice mild smoke. Probably cherry and apple are probably the most popular fruit woods to use with pork. Pretty much any fruit wood's going to be okay. But they're probably my personal favourite. So just putting it there, that's where we've got the lit charcoal at the back. So I'll go through the cooking process in there in a lot more detail, but I'm basically just temping it here. Timing wise, it's about where I want it. I'm just temping to see the internal temperature. Sweet. Oh. Right there. It's always good when it's dripping, isn't it? It's normally a good sign that something good's happening. So, taking it to the back of the smoker now. So I'll go through the cooking process in there a bit more, as I said, but basically the real short version for now is when you sear stuff off, you get what's called a Maillard reaction. That's what you learn in chef school. But all you need to know is basically a chemical reaction takes place that makes it taste awesome. If you take that too far and burn it, more chemicals come in that taste rubbish, like the black burnt ones. But yeah, if you don't sear stuff, you don't get that chemical reaction, so you don't quite get the full depth of flavour. So that's why we're finishing it off on a sear. You can do both sides, but you'll see that the bacon's crisped up pretty nicely on the top anyway. No, it's going to be more hassle than it's worth normally. You know, the bacon start going everywhere. Even if you've toothpicked it, obviously the toothpick's sticking out, so I find the bottom's fine enough all the time. If you want to get real fancy and wrap it a couple of times over in bacon, you know, you could do that and you could probably sear both sides, but normally the bottom's enough just to get that reaction. The top's sort of got some of that Maillard reaction anyway, so all good. So basically, you can do that on the grill grate that's supplied, but with fatty type stuff, when it's directly over the charcoal, if that fat drips onto the charcoal, you get like a fat fire. So you just want to be careful of those fat fires. Those things, their actual name, marketing name is grill grates, which just makes it confusing. But they're basically just cast aluminium grates. that just stop flare-ups, stop your fat fires a lot. They get nice and hot to kind of sear it off. And yeah, they just work well. So that sauce is just that honey sweet one. I put like a real tiny bit of apple cider vinegar in it just to loosen it up a little bit because it's a bit of a thicker sauce. Just kind of dab that on. Depending on what you're actually applying it to, you don't necessarily want to put like big long strokes because you might rub off some of the rub. So I kind of just dab it a little bit. I'll just sit it there and you can just help yourself while I go through the cook. So as you saw, we put that straight on the racks. That was cooked just with cherry wood. So it just had a real subtle smoke flavour. It was on there for about an hour and it was at 250 Fahrenheit, which is 120 degrees Celsius, so very low. Pork's ready at an internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, which is medium. If you're thinking about steaks, which is 62 degrees Celsius. Health-wise, the safe is medium, which is 145. So we took them to about 140 Fahrenheit. So you basically just undershoot it with the slow cooking and the low temperature, then you sear it off and allow for that kind of 5 degrees to come through. And that's gonna give you that perfect, you know, that real slight blush, but still nice and juicy and dripping juicy. Yep.